The Reach Gallery Museum is located in Abbotsford, British Columbia. The Reach is committed to preserving and sharing the stories of our rich and diverse cultural heritage and showcases the inspiring and provocative world of art and culture. This exhibition, on loan from the Canadian War Museum, looks at 100 years of the Canadian Navy's history. It focuses mainly on World War II, but there are also images of the First World War, the Korean War, the Gulf War, and training for Afghanistan. The exhibition is divided into 4 themes: the Canadian Navy, the Navy at Sea, the Navy's wars, and the continuing legacy of the Navy.
It's important to remember that we're seeing these scenes through the eyes of the artists. There's a real sense that personal memories, perspectives, and emotions are being communicated. These artists were often as young as their late teens or early 20s, and we can imagine it would be difficult to relay the intensity of the conflict they were experiencing.
The image that you see here was painted by John Everett in 1918 and is called the SSardinian. This was a large ocean liner used to transport troops over the Atlantic.
It depicts what was called the dazzle camouflage scheme used during World War I. Navy vessels would be painted in these different sections of color to create a distracting pattern. The idea was to make it more difficult to get a bearing if the enemy tried to sink the ship.
The patterns were changed and repainted at least once a year, so you can imagine how much work there was for artists. These ships were massive, so it would require an enormous amount of supplies and manpower. However, it was eventually decided that this tactic probably didn't do much good.
Next is a painting by Leonard Brooks, painted in 1944, called Tangled Float No. 2. In this work, the artist is watching the sailors try to rescue a float that has become tangled in the ropes. It would normally be towed behind the ship to help detect and destroy underwater mines.
It is difficult to imagine keeping one's balance on rough seas, trying to sketch a scene in the wind and the rain. These artists were not sailors. They likely had no experience in this type of setting. This painting really captures the sense of the boat rocking up and down, with the ocean swelling and the dark sky overhead.
In fact, in a letter to the National Gallery director, Brooks wrote, "I have managed to work out a system of scribbling and taking notes on this kind of rough day. By devious ways, I scribble a note or two on rough paper, dodge the spray and find my way below to redraw and fill in as much information as I can, dash up again and repeat the performance. It looks rather ridiculous, but is very effective."
This piece was created by Donald Mackay in 1943 and is called Protection. This work depicts a convoy crossing the North Atlantic during World War II. The beams of light, shining on the distant vessels, emphasize their goodness or importance. The dark clouds seen in the foreground symbolize the constant threat of enemy attack, and they emphasize the tension that was felt during wartime crossings.
In the top left corner, we can see a hand-like form in the clouds, and there is debate as to whether or not this was intentional. However, given the symbolic nature of the rest of the painting, many people believe this refers to a hand of protection over the Allied forces.
This is not a collection that glorifies war. Rather, it documents these important historical times. War art can be very complicated, involving many perspectives and opinions, but the strength of this collection is our ability to see these scenes through the eyes of the artists themselves.